this video I'll be looking at the Vampire Covenant Lamia list that I talked about before. So we went through the army list and we discussed all the different choices, and now I'm going to show an example of some first turn movement. These videos, they don't really consider the opposing army, so it's basically like an ideal scenario for the list. But well, with that said, we'll just get into it. I also have a picture of what the army looked like with the models that I have. So here you can see, well, the entire army. So we have the Lamia Vampire on the Griffin, which is going to be my Monstrous Revenant on the right. We have the Shrieking Horror in the middle, and then on the left side and the back we have the Dark Coach. In the front we have the ghouls, the zombies, and the skeletons. So with my Empire army that I also use for my Vampire Covenant, I usually just take either skeletons or ghouls just to make it more clear for my opponent, but just for this example I'll just mix them. And then the ranged weaponry is usually my zombies, just to keep it clear for the opponent. And then in the right front we have the raids, obviously. And then the engine all the way on the right, that's going to be the Court of the Damned. So this is what the army looks like in real life. And then let's get to it. So I'm once again deploying for a battle line scenario. So this is the scenario where you're just 12 inches away from the backside of your table. I'm not deploying for any specific scenario. And yeah, what we can see is, once again, we have some great bats in the army. They do give some nice early deployments, because they are not really that valuable to you up till the point where they can be used as chaff. The question is whether you should deploy them forward or not. Yeah, it really depends on what kind of army you're up against, and also on the deploys of your enemy. But I think generally with this army you would want to deploy them a bit further than with the other list, the Nosferatu list that we discussed before. Because the Nosferatu list that we discussed before is really passive, or at least you really want these first two turns to just raise more skeletons in your units. Whilst this list, it kind of has to do the stuff it wants to do with the pieces you already got on the board. You're not going to summon that many skeletons or zombies extra into your list, and you really have to rely on the raids, the Shrieking Horror and the Monstrous Revenant to do their job. And then also still you have the Ghoul block that can still dish out quite some damage. I think internally within the list, the ghouls, they really interact well with the raids and the Monstrous Revenant and the Shrieking Horror, because the ghouls, they deliver a lot of damage, but they have no AP whatsoever. The Court has 6 strength, 5 AP2 attacks, so that does help a little bit against those matchups where the ghouls would really struggle. But then the raids, they have AP10, the Shrieking Horror has AP10, and the Monstrous Revenant also has sufficient AP to handle a lot of situations. So what you see me do here is that I first deploy the Bat Swarms, and then later I'm starting to deploy the rest. Looking at the table, we have a piece of impossible terrain on the left side, which is quite favorable for the ghostly form units, so the raids most specifically. But you can still try to trick your opponent into doing something else. So the first deployment was the Bat Swarms, then I believe I deployed the zombies, just to take my opponent a bit off guard maybe. That could also be a scoring objective on the right side. If you're playing Capture the Flags, it might not be the right choice to do, but otherwise, having just a scoring unit on the right side, whereas the rest of your army is going to bunker on the left side, it's quite a viable option. And if you deploy it as your third deploy, then probably your opponent's going to think that you're going to lean more towards the right side of the table. So you're doing a bit of a refused flank here. This is a tactic where you at some point during your deployment try to deploy so much stuff on one side that your opponent thinks you're going to deploy at that side, and you try to lure away some essential pieces from your opponent to that side in that manner. Usually this is done with pieces that have quite a high damage output, so are quite mobile, just very mobile hammers that can also still zone. You could also argue that you could do this with like the Dark Coach and the Shrieking Horror, but generally you don't really do this with slow pieces, because if you do so, then your slow pieces are going to be singled out in the end, and you don't really get the revenue that you would want to get out of them. However, if you do that, then a lot of experienced players will catch you out on it, and they will realize that you're playing a refused flank. So then they will spot your trick right away, and it won't work. So with the deployment done, I can talk a bit more about this. So all the way on the left side, a little bit off camera, we have a unit of raids. They're gonna just march up on the left side and then threaten from there. We have the raids that are a bit closer to the impossible. They're gonna threaten from their position, being protected by the impossible terrain, but still being able to march out 12 inches and then magically move again to do a Reaper attack. So they zone 20 inches more or less from behind the terrain piece, which is quite a long distance, to be honest. And whilst they are behind the terrain piece, they really can't be harmed by anything from the enemy team. Because also very often magic missiles, they need line of sight. And that is quite difficult to get if you are behind an impossible terrain piece. Because they really block off well the left side, the Monstrous Revenant General can still choose whether to go for the left side or the right side of the impossible terrain. The Skeletons, I also put them in a position where they could still choose. It's not the best position for them, but it also depends what you want to do with them. Like right now, this is my Necromancer bunker. Probably it is going to be your Necromancer bunker if you don't use the zombies for that. And they also hold the Banshee at this point, so they still have some anti-chaff capabilities. It's really scenario dependent what you're going to do with these guys, and also matchup dependent. So if you see an army that is really high on the damage output, then this might become your sturdy anvil. And then you might have to run them up a bit more enthusiastically and just take the first hit and countercharge with all of your rest. If you don't have to, then, well, basically it's just a scoring unit that's going to hang in the back, hopefully go for the scenario, but it won't really be involved in any fighting, because on their own they're not really going to do a lot. On the right side still we have the Dark Coach that enables the rest of the list to march. You do have the Monstrous Revenant that has a commanding presence range of 18 inches, so it's not necessarily a problem to leave these guys on their own on the right side. However, the Dark Coach is really a nice piece on this right flank, or well, on the middle of the board in this case, to just zone a little bit more with Swift Stride to move 8. There's quite some things that would want to approach just the Shrieking Ore and some zombies, but won't do it anymore if there's also a Dark Coach involved. So the Shrieking Ore, the good part is that it's really good at taking out like a monster or a character that is just flying on his own. The bad part is that once it starts losing hit points, it's gonna go down pretty quickly. Because then also its combat power is really diminished. So it really benefits from having another unit around that can also threaten quite far. The fun thing here is that you can still draw back the bat swarms because of the March bubble of the Dark Coach. And the zombies, yeah, the zombies, they are a bit of a lost unit there, but I mean, if there is an objective on the right side, you can just leave them as they are now, and then and later in the game you can just focus them up a bit more. You do have to respect the fact that Vampire Covenant are not really good at marching when the rest of the army is gone. So you do have to take that into consideration. But yeah, it's still a unit of 20 zombies. Some light cavalry or something is not really gonna want to charge in that and go for the grind. So with the deployment done, we're gonna continue with the first turn movement. Yeah, let's see what we're gonna do here. So I'm just taking into consideration that he might have some units that have like an advance of 8 and swift stride, or that might just threaten quite deep onto the board. I'm gonna just cautiously move up, but still move up in a way that that is quite reasonable. So I could also have put a specific army on the other side of the field, but I think it also clouds your judgment a bit in how the list is supposed to work. So we'll just start with moving up the rates on the left side. So these guys are going to try to go over the left flank as fast as possible, because you want to make sure that you benefit from this glass cannon unit as much as possible. They are quite glassy. They're also quite a cannon. So you really have to be careful with how many turns you let your opponent cast magic at them, most specifically magic, but also still just range damage. They are only resilient 3 with a 3-up armor save or 3-up Aegis save against non-magical attacks. It's a bit like a knight unit, but then not with a 2-up save, but a 3-up save. Yeah, however, the AP of the other unit doesn't really matter. So with just 10 or 8 wounds in the unit, it's quite it's quite challenging to maintain the unit over a long period of time if your opponent starts to focus on it. So the Monster's Revenant, because we have the Dark Coach in the list, he can also just fly off to the left to further support the raids and really make this flank a pushing flank. And then we can really push through the army basically. Everything that is gonna threaten as far as 8 inches with Swift Stride is likely not gonna go through the ghouls in one round. I mean, worst case scenarios, it would be, I think, a unit of 10 Warrior Knights, or maybe Feldraks. Feldraks could be worse. So if you have 6 Feldraks or 5 Feldraks with a Feldrak hero or something, and it charges in, you might lose, I don't know, maximum of 20 ghouls, even if you're really unlucky and the opponent has some supportive magic. And then you might lose the unit. However, you probably still have 2 ranks left at that point, because of the Court of the Damned in the unit also. So then you're going to be steadfast, you're going to lose a max of 12 wounds, you're going to be ready for the counter charge with your Monster's Revenant, possibly also even with the raids on the right side behind the impossible terrain, because they can charge through. And then yeah, it's going to be a good time. So in the first turn, we also managed to move up a little bit on the right side. We're now doing the second turn. So in the second turn, we could move up even more. We can move up quite aggressively, considering that there is no army on the other side, obviously. But ideally, your ghouls, they don't really need to get into combat at this point, but they can just move up, just to put pressure on your opponent. Ideally, it's even better actually if they don't charge and get closer to the enemy war machines, backlines, etc., rather than to get stuck in combat quite far away from the vulnerable pieces of your enemy. I am giving myself an extra move with raids every turn with 1 unit because, well, we do have the Unholy Tome that is in the skeleton bunker, and we do have the Witchcraft movement spell that's on the Monster's Revenant guy, and still the wizard, the necromancer. I am gonna quickly check in the list. He is a wizard adept, so unfortunately we don't have Vanel's Dance another time. However, on the turns where we really need it, we can force through either Raven's Wing or the Bound spell. By first casting the Bound spell on 3 dice, it's gonna need an 8+ to dispel, and then the remaining dice we could use for Raven's Wing. And it's quite rare that your opponent has more than 6 dispel dice. I believe it's only 1 occasion where you have 7 dispel dice as an opponent, but that comes coupled with a -1 on the miscast modifier. So then you could 3 dice the bound spell, and then you have 5 dice left. In the worst case, you can just throw these 5 dice with your Monstrous Revenant guy. If you get a miscast, you're gonna get 4 hits that wound you on a 4 plus. And I'm also once again gonna check if we have an Aegis on this guy. He has Legend of the Black King, so probably out of these 4 hits, you're gonna wound twice. You're gonna save one of them, so you're gonna get 1 wound on your Monstrous Revenant guy. It's not too bad. It could be worse. So if it's really a game-changing plan, then you should just go for it, basically. Yeah. So this is how the list works, basically in an ideal situation. Let me know if you have any comments on how to do this in an even better way. And as always, see you next time.